My brother and my girlfriend got engaged behind my back, but dads will turn their celebration into a nightmare they deserved. When I was 17, I thought everything was normal in my family. My older brother, Chris, who was 25, and I had always been close, especially after our mom passed away when I was 10. After that, it was just me, Chris, and our dad. Dad did his best to keep everything together. He was a great guy, worked long hours, but always made time for us. He was big on teaching us values like loyalty, honesty, and respect. He drilled into us how important it was to stay loyal to the people we cared about. He even told us once, "If either of you ever cheats on someone, don't expect me to stand by you." I took that seriously. Cheating was something he didn't tolerate, and I figured Chris felt the same way. At the time, I was dating a girl named Ashley. We'd been together for a year, and I honestly thought she was the one. We hung out all the time, texted every night, typical high school stuff. Looking back now, I know it was just young love, but back then, it felt serious. I trusted her completely. She met my dad, came over for family dinners, and even hung out with Chris a lot. I never thought much of it. They seemed to get along, and I was happy to see them bonding. One day, I got out of track practice early. Our coach cut the session short to prepare for an event, so I got home about an hour earlier than usual. I remember thinking it'd be nice to relax before everyone else got home. I walked through the front door, tossed my bag on the floor, and headed to the kitchen for a snack. I was thinking about calling Ashley to see if she wanted to hang out or watch a movie. Then I noticed Chris's car in the driveway. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was usually at work or with friends, but I figured he had the day off. I didn't see him downstairs, so I assumed he was in his room. As I climbed the stairs, I heard voices coming from my room, Chris's and Ashley's. My stomach dropped. I stopped halfway up, thinking, okay, that's weird. Why are they in my room? It was my space, no one usually went in there unless I was there. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe they were looking for something or Chris was showing Ashley a video game. But then I heard them laughing, not casually, but in a way that felt off. I took a deep breath and walked the rest of the way up, trying to ignore the sinking feeling inside me. I pushed open the door, and there they were, together on my bed, in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. Everything froze. I stood there, staring, as they looked up with shocked expressions, like kids caught stealing cookies. Ashley scrambled off the bed, and Chris just sat there, looking like he didn't know what to say. I was too stunned to react. My brain struggled to process what my eyes were seeing. Chris, my own brother, and Ashley, the girl I'd been with for a year, it was like everything I knew about them shattered. A rush of anger, betrayal, and sadness hit me all at once. I couldn't get words out at first. They both started talking, trying to explain. Chris said things like, "Man, I'm sorry, we didn't mean for this to happen," and Ashley kept going on about how they had feelings for each other. I just stared, my hands shaking, unable to believe they were trying to justify it. "You didn't mean for this to happen?" I yelled. "Are you kidding me right now?" It felt like my world had flipped upside down. Chris tried to get off the bed, reaching out like he wanted to apologize, but I stepped back. I wasn't letting him get close. I told them both to get out of my room and leave me alone. Ashley said something about wanting to talk, but I wasn't hearing it. I told her we were done, no hesitation. What else was there to say? She cheated on me with my brother. And Chris, I didn't even know what to say to him. It felt like our bond was broken. When they finally left the room, I stood there, staring at the empty space where they'd been. It felt unreal, like I'd walked into a twisted version of my life. I kept replaying it in my head, wondering how they'd been sneaking around behind my back and how I never saw it coming. The worst part was wondering how long it had been going on. Had they been lying to me the whole time? I thought about all the times they hung out, and I felt like an idiot for not seeing the signs. I collapsed onto the floor, feeling like everything I trusted was gone. I sat there, trying to process it, but my mind was all over the place. The room felt smaller, like it was closing in. I couldn't believe the two people I trusted most had done this. I knew things would never be the same. I couldn't imagine forgiving either of them. I didn't know how I'd face Chris or what I'd tell Dad. All I knew was that everything felt messed up, and I wanted to get as far away from them as possible. So, I grabbed my stuff, went downstairs, and left the house. I needed to clear my head. I wandered around for hours, not knowing where to go or what to do. I didn't want to go home, see Chris, or run into Ashley. I felt alone, betrayed, and lost. How do you move on from something like that? Looking back, I wish I'd handled it better, but at 17, it felt like the end of the world. Things were never going to be the same, and that's how it all started. After everything went down, I was a wreck. My brother and girlfriend betrayed me in the worst way possible. I didn't know how to process it. I was running on autopilot, trying to get through each day without thinking too much, but it was impossible. Everywhere I went, I was reminded of what happened. When I finally made it home that night, Dad was waiting in the kitchen. He could tell something was off because he looked at me with a worried expression. Usually, he'd ask about practice or make small talk about dinner, but this time, he got straight to the point. "What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." I tried to play it off, saying I was just tired, but Dad wasn't buying it. He could always tell when something was up. I was so overwhelmed that everything came spilling out. I told him everything, how I walked in on Chris and Ashley, how they tried to apologize, and how I couldn't handle it. I didn't leave out any details. I needed him to understand how messed up it was. As I talked, I could see Dad's face change. At first, he looked confused, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then his expression shifted to pure anger. He clenched his fists, his face red, and I knew he was about to explode. I'd only seen him that mad a few times before, always when someone crossed a line he couldn't forgive. "You're telling me your own brother did this to you?" he said, his voice tense. "And with your girlfriend?" I nodded, feeling the anger and betrayal rise again. "Yeah, Dad, that's exactly what happened. I can't even believe it." For a moment, it was silent between us, the kind of silence that feels heavier than anything. Dad took a deep breath and then let loose. He started yelling for Chris, calling him down from his room. The whole house felt like it was shaking with his voice echoing through the walls. I heard Chris's footsteps coming down the stairs, and part of me wanted to disappear. I knew this was about to be a full-on explosion. When Chris entered the kitchen, he had that look like he knew what was coming. He didn't try to play dumb. Instead, he looked at me with a weird mix of regret and frustration. I wasn't in the mood to hear anything he had to say. Dad didn't waste time. He started yelling, and it was brutal. "How could you do this to your own brother? What the hell were you thinking?" Dad's voice was so loud I thought the neighbors would hear. Chris tried to defend himself, but it was weak. "Dad, look, it wasn't planned. It just happened. We have feelings for each other." Dad cut him off. "Feelings? You call betraying your family feelings? You know what we've been through, and you still chose to hurt your brother like this." It was like Dad was channeling all his anger, and I was right there with him. I wanted to yell too, to tell Chris how much he'd hurt me, how he destroyed our bond, but I couldn't get the words out. I just stood there, watching everything fall apart. Chris tried again, his voice more desperate. "Dad, it's not like that. We never meant for this to happen. It's just complicated." Dad wasn't having it. "There's nothing complicated about loyalty, Chris. You made a choice, and now you're going to face the consequences." Then he dropped the bombshell. He was kicking Chris out of the house. He pointed to the door and told him to pack his stuff and leave. Chris stood there, stunned, like he couldn't believe it. He looked at me, expecting me to say something, to defend him, but I just stared back. I had nothing to say. "Dad, you're really doing this?" Chris asked, his voice shaky. Dad didn't hesitate. "You betrayed your brother. You disrespected this family. I don't want you under my roof anymore." Chris didn't argue after that. He turned and walked up the stairs. I could hear him slamming stuff around as he packed. I stayed in the kitchen, my head spinning. I knew what Chris did was wrong, but seeing Dad kick him out felt surreal. Part of me felt relieved, he deserved it, but another part couldn't believe this was happening. Our family was falling apart, and I didn't know how to stop it. After a while, Chris came back down, a duffel bag over his shoulder. He didn't look at me or Dad as he walked toward the door. Before he left, he paused, his hand on the doorknob. "If this is how it's going to be, then I'm done with this family," he said, his voice low but cold. "I don't need any of you." Then, just like that, he was gone. The door slammed shut, and I was left standing with Dad, who looked like he was ready to punch a hole in the wall. I could see the disappointment and hurt in Dad's eyes, and I felt guilty. I knew it wasn't my fault, but I couldn't help feeling like I was the reason our family was breaking apart. If I hadn't walked in on them, maybe things would have been different. Dad put a hand on my shoulder, his voice softening. "You did nothing wrong, kid. Chris made his choices, and now he's got to live with them." I nodded, trying to believe it, but it was hard to shake the feeling of everything falling apart. We sat down for dinner, but there was a heavy silence between us. Usually, it was the three of us laughing and talking, but now it was just me and Dad. I could feel the space where Chris used to be. It felt empty. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything, the look on Chris's face when I walked in, the way Dad kicked him out, and the moment Chris walked out, saying he was done with us. I knew things were going to be different. There was no going back. A few years passed, and things didn't get better between me and Chris. I didn't expect them to. He moved out that night, and we cut all ties. I'd hear bits about him from our aunt or mutual friends, but that was it. Dad and I tried to move on, and for a while, it was just the two of us, making it work as best we could. Then, a couple of years ago, Dad got sick. Cancer. At first, we thought it was just the flu. He was tired and lost weight, but tests showed it was stage 4, too far along to do much. It was like everything crashed again. Dad was my rock through the mess with Chris and Ashley, and now he was fading away. I'd never felt so scared and helpless. I tried to stay strong for him. I figured he needed me to step up, and that's what I did. I drove him to appointments, stayed during treatments, and did whatever I could to keep his spirits up. We watched old movies, played cards, and talked about everything, except Chris. That was an unspoken rule. As Dad's condition worsened, he quit work, and I took on part-time jobs to cover bills. It was tough juggling work, school, and caring for him, but I didn't mind. Dad had done everything for me growing up, and now it was my turn. Despite everything, he tried to keep things light, cracking jokes and acting like everything was fine, even when I could see he was struggling. It was hard to watch, but I knew he didn't want me worrying too much. That's just how he was, always putting others first. One day, when things were really rough, Dad sat me down. "Listen, I want you to know how proud I am of you," he said. "You've been there for me through all of this, and I couldn't have asked for a better son." I felt a lump in my throat but forced a smile. "You don't have to thank me, Dad. I'm just doing what you taught me." But deep down, I was breaking. I knew he was preparing me for when he wouldn't be around. A couple of months later, Dad passed at home, with me by his side. Our aunt was there too. It was peaceful, but it felt like my world had been ripped away. He was my last real family, and now I was alone. The funeral was a blur. People offered condolences, telling me how great Dad was, and they were right. But all I could think about was how much I wished he was still here. What hurt most was that Chris didn't show up. Not a call, not a message, nothing. I hadn't heard from him since he walked out, and even when our aunt tried reaching out about Dad, he ignored it. I told myself it didn't matter, that it was better he stayed away, but it stung. This was his dad too. No matter what happened between us, he should have been there, at least for Dad. It felt like he'd erased himself from our lives completely. After the service, we gathered at my aunt's for a small reception. Dad's friends shared stories, and I tried to smile, but my mind kept drifting to Chris. I kept waiting for him to show up, thinking maybe he'd have a change of heart, but he never did. Later, we sorted out Dad's will. I had no idea what to expect. Dad never talked about money or plans. I figured there wouldn't be much after medical bills, but it turned out he had savings and investments I didn't know about, a lot of them. The lawyer explained that Dad left me almost everything: his house, savings, and assets. I was stunned. I knew Dad trusted me, but I never expected this. Then the lawyer mentioned that Dad left Chris a small amount, barely anything compared to my share, just enough that Chris couldn't contest it. I didn't know how to feel. On one hand, it seemed fair. Chris never came back or tried to make things right. On the other, it felt final, like Dad was ensuring Chris couldn't take advantage later. Our aunt looked at me with a sad expression. "He really wanted to make sure you were taken care of," she said. "He knew you'd be responsible." I nodded, trying to hold back tears. I felt grateful but incredibly lonely. That night, I sat in my old room at my aunt's, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything I'd lost. Dad was gone, Chris was a stranger, and I was left with this huge responsibility. My life had changed in months, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. I thought about the times Chris and I spent as kids, the laughs, the stupid arguments, how we had each other's backs. Now, it was gone, and for what? Over a girl who wasn't even around anymore. It felt pointless. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized Dad was right. Loyalty matters. Family matters. If Chris didn't want to be part of that, I had to accept it and move on. It hurt, and it felt unfair, but I couldn't change how things turned out. All I could do was honor Dad's memory and figure out what came next. It was going to be tough, but I owed it to him to keep going. A few weeks after the funeral, I was starting to navigate life without Dad. It wasn't easy, but I was managing, selling the house, dealing with paperwork, trying to move forward. I kept busy to avoid feeling alone. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from Chris. I hadn't heard from him in years. It was short: "We need to talk." I stared at the screen, feeling mixed emotions. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part was curious. Why now? What did he want after all this time? I agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown, a neutral spot. When I got there, Chris was already at a table, looking nervous. He'd changed, looked older, tired. I could tell life hadn't been easy for him. I sat down, and there was an awkward silence. I wasn't going to make the first move. I crossed my arms and waited. Finally, he cleared his throat. "So, I heard about Dad," he said, not looking me in the eye. "I know I wasn't there, but I'm sorry." I shrugged, not sure what to say. "Yeah, well, it's done now. What do you want, Chris?" He flinched, like he wasn't expecting me to be so blunt. "Look, I know I wasn't around. I know I messed up, but I'm struggling, man. I heard about the inheritance, and, well, I don't think it's fair that Dad left you everything and almost nothing for me." I felt anger building. The nerve of him to come here after all this time and talk about money like it was owed to him. "Are you serious right now? That's why you wanted to talk? Because of the money?" He held up his hands, trying to calm me down. "Look, I get it, you're mad, and you have every right to be, but I'm your brother, and I need your help." I leaned forward, glaring. "Brother? You haven't acted like my brother in years, Chris. You bailed on us when things got tough. You didn't show up when Dad was sick or when he died, and now you want money?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I know, but things were complicated. Ashley and I were trying to figure things out." "Don't even bring her up," I snapped, cutting him off. "I don't want to hear excuses about her or how complicated things were. You made your choice when you walked out. You had years to make things right, and you didn't. You could have picked up the phone, visited Dad, something, but you didn't." Chris looked down at the table. For a second, I thought he might listen, but then he shook his head. "You're just like Dad, you know that? Always holding grudges. Maybe that's why he left you everything. He was just using that fight as an excuse to favor you. That was it for me." I slammed my hand on the table, and a few people nearby turned to stare, but I didn't care. "Favor me? Are you kidding? Dad gave you every chance, Chris. He tried to reach out, and you pushed him away. You never tried to fix things." I could see Chris's face harden. He wasn't getting it. "Look, I'm not here to fight. I'm just asking for a little help. Things have been rough, and I thought maybe you'd be willing to share some of the inheritance." I felt like laughing, but not because it was funny, because I was fed up. "Share? You want me to share the money Dad left me after everything you did? You didn't even show up for his funeral, Chris. You think you deserve anything after that?" He flinched, looking genuinely hurt for a second. "I was going through stuff, all right? You have no idea what it's like." "No, Chris, I don't, and you know why? Because you shut me out. You made it clear you wanted nothing to do with this family. So don't come crawling back now acting like you're entitled to anything. You weren't there for Dad when he needed you, and you sure as hell weren't there for me." The silence between us was thick. Chris's face was red, and he looked like he wanted to say more, but he held back. I could see he was angry, but he knew he had no ground to stand on. "I just thought maybe we could start fresh, move past everything," he said. I shook my head, feeling more exhausted than anything. "I'm not holding a grudge, Chris. I'm just not pretending everything's fine when you've done nothing to fix what you broke. You made your choice a long time ago," he sighed, frustrated. "Fine, if that's how it's going to be. But just know you're making this about you, not about Dad." I couldn't believe he was trying to spin it that way. "This isn't about me, Chris. It's about you taking responsibility for what you did. If you think you're entitled to anything after abandoning us, then you're not the brother I used to know." He stood up, pushing his chair back so hard it scraped the floor. "All right, I get it. You don't want anything to do with me. But don't come crying to me when you end up just like Dad, bitter and alone." That stung, but I didn't let it show. I stared at him, keeping my face blank. "I'm not the one who walked away, Chris. You did. And if you can't see that, then we're done here." He glared at me one last time before storming out. I watched him leave, feeling the familiar mix of anger and disappointment. I don't know what I expected, but I'd hoped he'd genuinely apologize, that we could start fixing things. But he was the same Chris who left years ago, always shifting blame, making excuses. I sat there for a while, staring at the empty seat. Part of me felt relieved I'd said my piece, but another part was just tired of hoping things could go back to how they were, tired of pretending Chris would change. I knew I made the right call. Dad left me what he did for a reason, and Chris wasn't part of that picture anymore. I had to move forward, with or without him. A couple of days later, I got a call from our aunt. She'd heard about our argument and wasn't happy with how it went. She asked me to come over to talk. I knew where this was going, but I figured I'd hear her out. Our aunt was always the family mediator, trying to keep everyone together, even when things got messy. A couple of hours later, I was on her couch, bracing for her lecture. "I heard you and Chris had a bit of a fight the other day," she said, giving me that look she used when she thought I was being unreasonable. "Yeah, we talked," I replied, keeping my tone casual, "but it's not like it changed anything. He still thinks he's entitled to Dad's money, and I'm not handing it over just because he's in a tough spot," she sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I know you and Chris have a lot of history, and I know what he did was wrong, but he's still your brother. If you keep holding on to this grudge, you're never going to have a relationship with him." I felt my hands clench, and I took a deep breath. "Auntie, it's not about holding a grudge. It's about what he did and how he's acting now. He had years to fix things with Dad, and he didn't. He had years to reach out to me, and he didn't. And now, when there's money involved, suddenly he cares." She nodded, but I could see she was trying to get me to see his side. "I know it seems like that, but maybe he's reaching out because he finally realizes he made mistakes. Maybe he's just too proud to say it outright." I shook my head. "Or maybe he's just saying whatever he thinks will get him the money. I don't trust him, Auntie, not after everything." She looked at me, weighing her next words. "You know, when your dad was sick, he always hoped you and Chris would work things out. He told me he wanted you two to have each other, especially after he was gone." That stung. I knew Dad wanted us to get along. What parent wouldn't? But he also knew what Chris did and why I kept my distance. I know Dad wanted that, but it's not that simple. Chris burned that bridge when he betrayed me, and I'm not pretending everything's fine just because he suddenly wants to be brothers again. My aunt sighed heavily. "I get it, and I'm not saying you have to forgive him right away or even give him any money, but don't shut him out completely. If you close that door, you might regret it later." I didn't say anything for a while, just stared at the floor, thinking. Part of me knew she was right, holding on to anger wasn't healthy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Chris was only reaching out for personal gain. "Look, Auntie, I get what you're saying," I finally said, "but he made his choice. I'm not closing the door, but I'm not letting him walk back in like nothing happened either. He has to show he's actually sorry, not just because he wants money." She didn't look satisfied but nodded. "Fair enough. Just promise me you'll think about it, okay?" I promised, but in my head, I was set. I wasn't changing my mind just because Chris showed up. If he wanted to be part of my life, he'd have to earn it. A few days later, I got another message from Chris, longer this time. He said he thought about what I said and wanted to fix things, but he still mentioned the inheritance. "I don't want all of it," he wrote, "but maybe you could help me out a bit, just a loan or something." I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the reply button. A loan? After everything? I felt that anger bubbling up again but took a breath. Maybe he was desperate, but then I remembered how he looked at the coffee shop, how he kept justifying what he did, how he blamed me and Dad for his problems. I put my phone down without replying. I wasn't getting dragged into this again. If Chris wanted to fix things, he needed to do it without bringing up money every time. I wasn't his ATM. The next day, I got another call from our aunt. She asked if I'd thought about what she said. I told her I had, but my mind hadn't changed. "I want to see him try for real, Auntie. If he can't do that without bringing up money, then I don't know what to tell you," she sighed, disappointed, but didn't push further. "All right, just keep an open mind, okay?" After that, I didn't hear from Chris for a while. I focused on my own life, got a new job, moved to a different apartment, started building a life outside the drama. It felt good to have a fresh start, even if part of me still ached when I thought about how things ended with Chris. The hardest part was feeling like I'd lost my brother for good. We used to be so close, and now we were strangers. I'd see people with their siblings, and it hit me, Chris and I would probably never have that again, not unless he really changed, but I knew I had to stand by my decision. If I let him walk all over me now, what message would that send? That he could betray me and Dad, disappear for years, then come back when it was convenient? I wasn't letting that happen. In the end, I knew I was making the right choice, even if it didn't always feel great. Sticking to your boundaries is hard, especially with family, but I knew if Dad were still around, he'd tell me to stay strong and not let anyone take advantage of me. So, that's what I did. I moved forward, holding on to the hope that maybe one day Chris would understand what he did and try to make things right, not for the money, but because he really wanted to be brothers again. Until then, I was done giving him chances.